We're here because of a river, and not just any river. She spans a continent, and with her tributaries forms one of the great river basins of the world. New Orleans was founded where it is because of that great river, and in time she became a magnet, attracting to her commerce and people, trade, industry, for working and for living. Around the Queen City of the Mississippi grew other smaller communities, each with its own unique blend of people, each with its own reason for being, each with its own history. In time, the legislature would call her Jefferson Parish, but she would always think of herself as the free state of Jefferson, a community as storied, as lively, and as interesting as her more famous sister, New Orleans. A community is not formed by political considerations, not by lines drawn on a map. It is rather the mixing and mingling of people that in time produces a community, the daily living together that changes a place into a home. Welcome to Jefferson Genesis, the story of our community. Loretta BREHM is a retired school teacher of the Jefferson Parish Public School System and a member of the Jefferson Parish Historical Society. More importantly for our purposes, she is a lifelong resident of the City of Westwego. She is a repository of memories of its history, people, and culture. She is unashamedly and happily a booster of her city. We met in her garden-surrounded home to share with her her passion for one of the oldest communities of Jefferson Parish.
I think one of the nicest things of ex-students, I taught a young man about 50 years ago in Belchaz, and they call him Red Olano. He was Chief Choctaw this year. He contacted me and with my daughter. He was most gracious. He took us along with his family to the balls, to the boat trip, to the parades, to everything. Took us in just like family. When his wife and daughter got a bouquet or whatever, we got one too. It was just great. And I said to think that after all these years, 50 years, I had taught him in Belchaz, and I said he remembered. So when I wrote him a little thank you note, I said, well, I never did call him Red. I said, Randolph, I said, you've given me my flowers when I can smell them. I said, that's the best way to enjoy them. But he was most gracious.
We were talking before we came here about the anomaly that, as far as I know, Westwego is the only city in the United States whose name makes a complete sentence.
That's correct.
And we were talking about various stories, legends, what you will, as to how the name began. Do you have any ideas or opinions?
Well, it's all written down in the quarterlies that the parish had. I have 2 or 3 of them sitting over there. And there are 2 versions of this. It had to do with crossing the river because everything had to come from the New Orleans side, but really that was part of Jefferson Parish at the time, the Carrollton section. Mm-hmm. I'm originally from Carrollton. I was born in Carrollton. And my father was a grain inspector at the elevator. Where the gypsum plant is now was the elevator. And they used to have to come across in a skiff all the time. So my mother said, well, it gets a little bad sometimes with the weather, so let's see about going over there. Now, the railroad operated the elevators, you see, and they provided living quarters for all of the employees. And my father was offered what was called 7 Oaks. Now, prior to World War II and during World War II, that was referred to as Columbia Garden. And then somebody saw 7 Oaks, I think, around. I don't know how the 7 Oaks got in there, but it got in there, and it's been the space is referred to as Seven Oaks, but the building was there. So my mother said no, she didn't want to go there because she loved her yard, she loved her garden. And she said once she planted something and it grew, she didn't want to have to pick up and leave should he lose his job at the railroad, you see. So she came back here. And there was no means of transportation other than by water and through Mud Street. So our furnishings were put on a barge and brought through the river, through the locks, and brought here, and we used to have a canal here. And that canal had a levee. Now the reason that levee was there was because the dredge only worked one way. And this side of the canal had the levee, nice high levee, and the other side was perfectly flat. So that when the tide came in, and we did have one or two crevasses and floods, it would take care of the other side very well, but we were fairly well protected because we had this levee, you see. So the furniture came on the barge to this place. Now that two-story house I showed you in the picture was not the house we came to. Where that house is over there, there was a two-story house there on a 7-foot brick foundation, but the 1915 storm blew it down. Now this two-story house that I'm showing you was built by Mr. Ritter for his daughter who was planning to marry, and she decided she didn't want to stay here because they lived too close. Afterwards, so the house was here. So when the 1915 storm blew the house down off of that 7-foot foundation, we came through and came over to this two-story house that was here, and we stayed in it and endured the storm. And
that wasn't the no, that was much later than, because we were talking about the name, and the two stories that I heard about the name. One was that when the railroad would leave from here, they would say West we go.
Right.
And the other one was the coming out of Chenier hurricane, where they were fleeing from that, and they were coming west to get away from the storms. So West we go was the other story that I heard.
Well, one had to do with the crossing coming from the river, and the other had to do with the railroad mainly. Now there used to be a roundhouse, a railroad roundhouse up there, right where, just before you get to where the locks was, you see, and that was up there where the gypsum plant is. And the railroad played a big part in the naming of this and the directions they were going. Yeah.
Well, in what you were talking about, you touched on, I suppose, what in a lot of ways is the history of Westwego, the canal and the fishing and the railroad.
That's right.
That's what built the town.
That's
but the 1915 storm, that wasn't the great Caminata Chenier.
Oh, no, 1893.
1893.
Was the Chenier Caminata storm.
They didn't name storms back there.
No.
So now we can say Betsy, Camille, Ron, and we know what we're talking about.
But what they did was name it for the place where the storm struck, you see. Now, when the storm in 1893 at Chenier, that's just on the edge of Grand Island, so many, now my stepfather was Captain Joe Coulon, and he was my stepfather for 32 years, and he was in the storm.
Really?
And he could tell the greatest stories. And he said how horrible it was to hear people screaming and see them dashed up into the trees. Now they were saved. They went up to the rooftops. He always wanted to have a hatchet or something in the house when there was to be a storm. He says you could chop a hole in the rooftop and get on top of the roof, and that's how they were saved. They went on top of the roof, and then there was some logs and stuff that were floating. And some of the people got onto those and floated around for 2 or 3 days. And the oranges and stuff were floating on top of the water, and they would get a few things that they could nibble on until such time, you see. Now, so many of these people from Chenier came in, and their families were here, you see. And that's how our cemetery was established. There were 10 men, I have the papers, to show who they were, and they purchased this land, and they stated that any family or anyone from the Chenier that wanted to use it, plus it was to be a place for the Catholic Church and the a rectory or whatever they wanted to do for that. So I have the legal
That was the
papers.
first cemetery in Westwego
That-
because of the seniority?
Yeah, the first and only that they had. And you see, then those people were allowed to bury there. They had a place of burial, you see. So I'll show you the cemetery too as we go around through the town.
What was the first settlement here? Was it Pablo Sala, and that's why it's called Salaville?
Salaville, yes, Pablo Sala. And it was called Salaville. But this was at one time referred to as Barrow. Mr. Barrow was involved in getting some part of the land that had to do with the canal. And this was referred to as Barrow Avenue, B-A-R-R-O-W. And for a while, that was a name that it carried, Barrow Avenue. But the area itself, you see, you had this orang plantation.
Mm-hmm.
That was the 7 Oaks, as they said. And so you had the company canal then was formed. And then, of course, it was a private enterprise because it was connecting the river to Bisonet. Now, when I show you where all this fishing stuff is, when you turned off, you might have noticed across the expressway that it looked like a French market with seafood and the stuff of that sort. And so that was all connecting to where the Bisonet line is. Now, I understand you can't fill in a natural bayou. And for that reason, that's where it stops, you see, right where Robinson has his canning company back there.
I see.
And the boats are tied up. You'd be interested in seeing that because I think that's fascinating. And as I told you, there's a big thing going on back there at Robinson Canning Company. I think they've been here since about 1925, around in through there. And they first were up there with a cannery that was behind where the ice house is. I'm going to show you. It was on a canal bank. And so he was in with a Mr. Pisani, Hall Pisani, and then he and Pisani were together. And then they came back here, but he was wise. He chose the Bisonet edge where they couldn't close it in, you see, and he'd have that water transportation. The boats come right up to the factory and unload. Mm-hmm. And he's had that all this time. He had 3 sons. One's deceased, but he has 2 living.
The canal that you were talking about has been largely filled in now. When
the
did
whole
they
thing's
fill
filled in. I don't know the exact date. It's been maybe 15 or so years. I don't remember. But I tell you, that was the loveliest thing ever. This was God's country at one time. To describe it to you thusly, to the back, now these lots run 360 feet deep. That's the equivalent of a city block, I think. Mm-hmm. 360 feet deep. At this, that was nothing but woods. The deer, the wildlife, and everything came right up to the fence. Woods was beautiful. We used to drain to the back because they had a special drain. It was going out toward the lake, you see. And so we just had everything. The canal was beautiful. Everybody had a little skiff. That was the only way you could get to the other side unless you walked all the way up here about a half a mile to the railroad track and cross over. But everybody had a little wharf out in front of their place. They had a little skiff, or some of them called them pirogues, or they had dugouts or whatever, and they had a little wharf. It was tied up there, and that's how you'd get across. If you didn't want to walk up to the bridge, railroad bridge, and turned around. And I think it was somewhere around 1936 when Mr. Hanson was on the school board, and I called his attention to it. I said, Mr. Hanson, I said, you realize what our children are doing? They're walking on a railroad track that has a great big sign that says private property, no trespassing. And I said, our kids have to get to school on the other side. So he immediately got himself busy and had the transit company run a bus at a certain time to come around by the river, come pick them up, take them to school. I think it ran from about 8 in the morning until about 9:30 or 10, and in the afternoon about 3 o'clock to get them all back. But those kids had to walk from here to the track and cross over on their own on railroad property, a railroad track. That's how we got across.
I can remember about 30 years ago, I suppose. I had relatives living in Westwego.
What were the names?
Sanchez, of course.
Sanchez? Well, I mean, you could have had a relative other than a Sanchez.
Yeah, I know. No, in fact, one of my cousins did pretty well as a Golden Gloves boxer at one time. Mm-hmm. But growing up in the city in New Orleans, when we came over to visit, our relatives, this was coming into the country.
Oh, yeah.
And in just, one short lifetime, it has changed, so very much.
Oh, yes.
And now you would never think of this as being, even semi-rural.
That's right.
It's all industrialized and the homes and subdivisions and everything else. And you must have seen it change even a great deal more, because you're 3 years older than I am.
Come now, don't be too charitable, because I only pay off at the first of the month when I get my check, when I get my retirement check on the first of the month. That's when I pay off. But getting back to this canal, we used to have savers out there by our little wharfs. When they'd open the locks, river shrimp would come in, and we had river shrimp. When a southeast wind would blow, we'd have crabs. We'd have all sorts of seafood that we kept in our savers, and whenever we wanted seafood, we could just walk out there and get it from our savers and have it right here. And this had the heavy traffic, water traffic. We had these great big paddle boats that used to come through and carry the merchandise from New Orleans out into the Gulf and wherever else it was going. When this canal was opened up, Harvey Canal was a little ditch. Mm-hmm. Harvey used to have a lift where they used to lift the boats over, to get it from their little canal into the river. All freight was going through here. We had heavy freight going through here. And you see, they used to cut the logs across the river, almost directly across from us, was a creosote plant. And you used to cut the trees, and they used to put them together with wire and strips, and they'd push-pole them through the canal, through the locks, and take them over to the creosote plant. And they were treated there with creosote, you see. And during Prohibition, this is all good.
That's all right. Everybody's got stories about Prohibition.
Well, during Prohibition, it was, we didn't find out until years later. We were having this, they had the 5-gallon cans. They were squared thusly, and about so high, 5 gallons, and they were about so, with a handle in the middle, 5-gallon cans. And underneath these logs, these strips that were holding the logs together were hooks. And these hooks were in these handles, and they were carrying the alcohol in these 5-gallon cans, pulling them through broad daylight in front of everybody out into the river, or bringing them back, or whatever, you see. So I said, well, I'll declare, even during Prohibition, we had some great stuff going on here. But right in front of our eyes, broad daylight.
Because who would think to look under the logs in the water?
That's when we found out that that's what was going through, we said, never can tell.
We were talking about the industry here and how it's changed so much. And I know that, as we said, the railroad and seafood were the two big industries. And, what did we have here? You mentioned the Robinson Canning Company.
Yeah. Well, we had a number of factories that were here at the time. Now, if we start from the river, coming up from the river to the railroad crossing, Texas and Pacific, Missouri Pacific line, I'll show you where that was. You had Pizzani had the shrimp factory that was right by the ice house, and I'll show you where that is too. That's still there. And then if you came a little bit closer coming this way, on the second track coming this way, you had, before that, you had Dunbar Duquette, which was a shrimp and crab factory. Oh, that was a big one. That was up on Sala Avenue, facing Sala. But all of them, you see, emptied from the canal, from the boats. They could empty right onto the deal. Then you came a little bit closer, and you had Leo English had a shrimp factory right where the cemetery is in that area. And it was also, we had two shipyards. We had Jesse Tybo Shipyard, which was close to the cemetery, and that's from the family that has the Tybo Shipyard down in Harvey Canal. That's the same family, the Tybo family. Then you had another, was the Marcombe Shipyard, and Marcombe branched over and went into Lafitte. The Marcombe Shipyard in Lafitte is the branch from here. So we had the two shipyards along there. But shrimping and seafoods, mostly shrimp, we had the three factories. Now, after a while, Leo English's factory on this end, it burned. And what set it on fire? They used to dry the shrimp hulls. And they had dried them and sacked them. And they had them stacked into the place. And you had a sort of spontaneous combustion that occurred and set the thing on fire. And that was somewhere around, I'd say between 1923 and 24, because we still had the two-story house. And my father was a fireman, and he always wore a flannel shirt, summer, winter, whatever have you, to avoid colds. That was some superstition or something, I don't know, but he always wore this wool shirt. And upstairs, the mirror reflected the flames from the factory, Leo English's shrimp factory, and without his shirt, he went in the cold, freezing weather to the fire, because in those days you carried water more or less from the canal and doused it or whatever. So he went and he caught his first cold from that exposure. And that's how I remember that so well. And everything came through the canal on these shrimp boats. They unloaded them right there. They built a wharf right on the edge of the factory to the water, and you just unloaded right onto the wharf and took them right into the factory. But they did crabs too up there at Dunbar Duquette factory.
When they did when the Harvey Canal became part of the intracoastal waterway, did that take the business away from down here?
Well, it took your good bit of your paddle boats from there, yes. Because you see, really and truly, if we had had foresight politically, we would have developed like Harvey Canal developed. But you see, because everything started here. We were developed here before the Harvey Canal. And all the freight came through here. Everything came through here. And these big paddle boats, and this was like Venice. The kids used to swim in the canal. That's how clean and fine the water was. And those who couldn't really swim, when they made these pickets, I can even show you some of those. I got some about 100 or so years old. They were about 12 inches wide and about so thick. Those pickets were made from the outer edge of the bark of the tree when they trimmed it off, you see. And so the kid would get one of those. They were about so wide and about 6 foot long. And if he couldn't swim, he just held on to that for dear life and kicked like crazy. And everybody swam in the canals. And when these big boats were coming through, but they would draw so much water. You could see all the bottom of the canal, all the mud. You could see all the little fish, all the little shrimp and stuff, But they had a signal that they would blow. They had to blow for the bridges to open. So when they would blow for the Texas Pacific, Missouri Pacific bridge to open, that was the first one coming from the river, we knew the sound of every boat. And the kids would yell down to each other, just like in Venice. Kids would yell down to each other. The home is coming. We knew that, for example, that was the famous boat. The home is coming, and the kids would start getting out the canal little by little bit. Then they had to blow again for that second bridge to open coming this way, you see. And by that time, every kid was out standing on the canal bank with his well, we'll say his little raft that he was floating around, but it was really a piece of bark from a tree that he was holding on to where he was doing his swimming. But, and then when the boat was gone, you had to wait a while so that all this water came back, because you could have really been pulled under. But you could see the bottom, 6 and 7 feet way out. How these boats got through there, they must have barely skimmed the top. But that's the kind of thing we had. Now, in front of here, my father had horses, and he raised hogs. And just for, well, I'll say local consumption for his friends and what have you, because every Saturday they'd butcher a hog and what have you. And he had what they call these OIC hogs. They were the black ones with the white saddle. So he had them all along the canal. in little pens, and they could go down into the water, you know, and bathe and whatever and what have you. But all along the canal in front of us were these hogs, and then he had his horses. And talking about boats, there was one boat, there was some very wealthy person, I don't recall the name. He had a yacht by the name of the Polly. And once a year, that Polly came through. Everybody knew the sound of the Polly. When it came through the locks by the river, they would throw baseballs and great big peppermint sticks about, I guess 12, 14 inches long and easy 1.5 inches round. And they'd throw peppermint sticks and baseballs on both sides of the canal, you see, both levees. And everybody knew the sound. Everybody ran out, just like a carnival parade, but they were throwing the baseballs and the candy. And we had ours fenced off for the horses and the hogs, you see, so they couldn't so well come in. So we had the whole frontage there of whatever they were throwing. But I forget the name of the family, but every year, once a year, he came through.
Well, the horses and hogs remind me, we've been talking about railroads and shrimping and so forth, but there was some agriculture, or there was an attempt, wasn't back at Churchill Farms?
All right, now Churchill Farms used our place. That was, Mr. Churchill was from Chicago. But our Mr. Cruz, our Mr. John Cruz, was the person who was more or less instigating this stuff and got involved, because he was from that area too, I think. But he used to come here, and well, this place my mother had, it was really a place to see. She had orange trees. She had everything you could think of. There wasn't an inch of ground that wasn't covered with something. Lilies all this side. In the season, it was snow white with Easter lilies. Then they had the red lilies, and they had their season. But that was all, every inch of ground in this place, she cultivated and did it herself. And she had all of this together. But getting back to Churchill Farms, so Mr. Cruz was very interested. So he would come here and take pictures. I have some of them. I don't have them out, but I have some. Mr. Cruz came and he took pictures, and they advertised in the Northern magazines, you see. Mm-hmm. Now, I knew the situation very well for this reason. He came here, he was associated with my mother as far as the agriculture and all this good stuff, you know. And we got to be very friendly. So the newspaper was only brought as far as here. But they had what do you call them, that the workmen live on, houseboats, camp boats, houseboats. And they had their own hired cook. She was black. Her name was Constance. I can see her yet. And they used to live there, you see, and stay there and go out wherever they were coming from. So Churchill had this, it was beautiful. It was all virgin soil. They had corn, 6, 7, 8 feet tall. I have pictures of that. And it was just all virgin soil, you see, but it had been drained. And when Mr. Churchill took ill, well, his wife was never too happy about the situation there. He would come in all the time, and you know how that goes. So when he took ill and one of the pumps went bad, she said no, she didn't think she wanted to invest anything back there at all. Now the Ritchie family was running it more or less, you see. Mm-hmm. And like I say, Mr. Cruz was the first one we made a contact with. And he was back there. They had their office. They had everything. Oh, but what they raised back there, fabulous. But like I said, they had virgin soil, you see. It had always, but that drain, when that pump went bad, that was the end of the line. So now we have our good friend Carlos, who has the place back there. But to get back to the newspaper, you see how I knew it so well. This was the end of the line for them to bring newspaper. So I would walk every afternoon, and that's the only way we got anyway, was to walk. I would walk from here, and they had 3 sloughs, as they call them, 3 little water openings and stuff. You'd walk all the way back there, and I'd bring the newspaper, and they'd pay me. That's how, listen, in those days, we learned how to work, and we learned how to earn our money. And we learned how to appreciate what we had and what we got, because we worked and earned the money to pay for it. Through school and everything else, we didn't have free school books. We didn't have free lunch. We didn't have anything free. you see. Back there at Constance, I never shall forget, she'd have donuts, they call them beignets around in these parts, but she referred to them, but they were just exactly like that. And she'd have that big bowl of beignets waiting for me when I got there every afternoon. And of course, you know, I couldn't eat them all. I tried. I did my darndest. But I always was, up until I was 40 years old, I was very thin. I didn't weigh more than 100 and, well, I married at 35 and I only weighed 120 pounds. So, get a picture up there to show it. Nobody'd ever believe it. So, Lord, So, when I got to be 40, I got fat and 40. See. So, I would take them home. She'd fix them in a little bag, and I'd bring these beignets home. And that was the first time I had ever touched a black person's hair. I wondered about it. So one day she had arthritis, I guess, and she asked me to comb her hair. Well, that was the strangest experience I had ever had, because I had never, you know, before done this. But we were all family. Everybody just looked out and helped everybody else, you see. So getting back to Churchill Farms, so when she didn't have the pump fixed and stuff, well, it all went underwater, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And the riches and all moved away and what have you. But oh, it was wonderful. But getting back to the, everything just grew beautifully. This was God's country. It's just like when they sent me the slip to fill out to reevaluate your property, you know. I said, look, I'm supposed to know how to read, but I don't know how to fill this out. I called the office and I said, tell me what to do. I said, if it's for commercial, that's one thing, which it is now, really. I said, but if it's for living quarters, I said, I wouldn't give you a dime for the whole thing. But I said, when we came here, it was God's country.
Yeah.
But I said, everything was just so, you had the water, the canal, you had the woods, you had the wildlife. It was just so quiet. It was a dead-end street right down here. It's a dead end.
Talking about government and all like that, Westwego is one of the oldest cities in Jefferson Parish. I think that maybe only Gretna or possibly Kenner has existed longer as an incorporated community.
I think it was 1919.
I believe our recollections agree. I personally was not there, but I've read about it.
1919. Well, I was around, and we see, that's what happened with the school situation. We had, incidentally, you know Bill Justice?
Sure.
All right.
Former clerk of court.
His mother was the first teacher in public school, but she was under the police jury setup.
Mm-hmm.
It was not a public school situation like we have here, school board and all that good stuff. It was police jury. And she was a wall. And she taught, I have the notation there, let's see here, I have the year written down. And she taught under police jury. But Mr. Justice was a bridge tender by the tracks. In between the tracks, there was a building there, and they stayed there. As I said, the railroad provided buildings for their employees. And he was there, and so he, Mr. Justice and Miss Wall became well acquainted, and they were soon married. There was a law that said the minute you married, that you were no longer employed. That's where the expression old maid school teacher comes from. Because if you were a school teacher at the designated age, you automatically gave up your job when you got married. It was not until about 1939, I think, till a court case came up, and it was made to a sensible ruling that being married had not anything to do with your teaching. But up until then, the day you married and they found out about it, either you turned in your resignation or else they resigned you themselves. So Mrs. Justice then and Miss Wall and Mr. Justice, and when they got married, she naturally had to resign, but she was under the police jury system. Then the school board, and I'll show you the little place where she used to teach. Well, it's not there, but I can show you a picture of it.
I suppose the The best known name in education in Westwego, at least on my part, is Stella Worley.
Stella Worley. Well, she came in under the school system, you see. Now, prior to or about the same time as Miss Wall, there was a Mr. Elwar. In his home, he used to have some few students come, and he was teaching them then from his home. There's a little house on Sally Avenue that's in that area, and it looks very much like the picture that I have, you see. And he did a little teaching, but he was not under the parish system at all. But you see, when the police jury had it, that was one thing. Then when your school system came in, that was something else, you see. But Miss Worley would have been the first under the public school system.
That was J.C. Ellis who started building the schools.
He was the superintendent of schools. I have his picture. A student drew it, and it's excellent of him. And I remember him so well. Oh, he loved, I don't care what time of the day. You see, there was home economics in the Westwego school, high school. And I was in the first class that they had of home economics. And a Miss Virginia Cooper, incidentally, she wrote a book and all that good stuff. But she taught us home economics, first home economics class they had. I was in that class. And no matter what time of the day Mr. Ellis came to school, he liked scrambled eggs and biscuits. And one of us got excused from some class or other, and we chased down to the home ec department, and we had scrambled eggs and biscuits for Mr. Ellis. Delightful person. I mean, I don't think anything ever excited him. Nothing. He just came and went.
I guess you can't get excited if you're going to be superintendent for nearly 40 years.
Yes, definitely. I have the picture where he and then Mr. Higgins, you know, and all of that. I have all these good pictures that you might enjoy seeing. But he was really delightful. But he was slow. He's talking just as calm. I can see Mr. Over yesterday. And you see when Miss Cooper left, well then I was out and teaching by that time, and I had majored in home economics, and I taught the home economics for a while.
For some reason, that brings me back to thoughts of Stella Worley.
All right,
You must have been a student. You must have been a student of hers, and that doesn't give away your age because she was around
I'm
for so
73.
long.
I don't mind telling my age. I'm 73. I'm tickled to death to be here.
I would be too.
There are not too many around, you know.
But what memories do you have of her?
Stella Worley, if I get it right, she had responsibilities that she carried to the nth degree. In other words, she wanted it done, and you were to have it done the way she wanted it. Now, sometimes we didn't always agree, and most students don't always agree with the teacher and the like. But she had taught so many of these parents. You see, she taught a lot of these people that came in from Chenier who couldn't even read and write their own names. Some of our most prominent people in the town, from mayor on down, or mayor on up, and those that ended up in the courthouse and stuff, didn't even know how to read and write their own name when they came here from the storm. And she taught these people individually, you see. Then their offspring, and so forth and so on. But she was a wonderful person, and I think I learned what I thought were her shortcomings real soon. If she made up her mind, that was it. No matter what you tried to tell her, forget it. That was it. That's how it had to be. So, but she was a fine person, and she really pushed a good bit. Now, you see what made it a little difficult for her in this respect, financially. See, we didn't have all this gimme stuff. You had to make and get whatever you had to have. In other words, we had to have plays. We had to have entertainments. Our parents had to come and support all of this good stuff.
I guess in researching the story of her life, I was just impressed by the fact that, you know, there weren't all the services,
That's
the support
right.
services.
You had to go get it.
And that, you know, she seemed, in what I read anyway, to have almost created education in Westwego and just pushed by sheer force of character.
That's it.
To establish all these
you had to
things.
do it, you see.
I remember when the school burned down, they went out and got barrels and planks to form the seats for the the students in the room, and someone donated books. And they were having them in the church, and I think in an old plantation house. And,
Right.
And she was not only principal, but she was walking between the
That's
two
right.
school
That's
sites
what she
to
had
teach
to do.
classes
That's
as
right.
well. How did you happen to get into education?
Well, it was just one of these things. I'm going to tell you what. As I tell you, I wasn't the brightest kid in school, but there were only 9 people in my class, you see. And I'm going to show you our doings. They were all living, incidentally. 7 girls and 2 boys. And I'll show you where we had a reunion of 50 years and all the good stuff. Well, anyhow, to finish telling you this, my mother said that I was to go to college. That was it. So in those days, there wasn't too much that you did to go to college. But there was a setup whereby you had to go to a state normal school
Right.
if you were going to teach in the state. So there was only one in the state, and that was up at Natchitoches. See, the state normal college at Natchitoches. If you were going to teach in the city of New Orleans, you went to city normal, you see. You were going to teach in that area. So if you were going to be a teacher, you had to go to either one of these 2 places. So my father worked for the railroad, and we had never asked for a pass. You were allowed, the employees were allowed for passes. We had never asked for a pass, but my father was deceased then, and because he died when I was 10 years old. And so I went to Mr. Pennington, and I called, and he wasn't in the office at the time, so I wrote a letter. I said, we've never asked for a pass for anything, but I want to go to Natchitoches. And I said, funds are limited, and if there's a possibility of getting a pass to and from school to Natchitoches. The only way you could go is by train.
Sure.
And it took 8 hours from the Gretna station to Natchitoches. 8 hours, I mean, chug, chug, chug. It stopped at every house and twice if it was a double house. But we had our own car, just so to speak, because everybody got on there from all over Gretna and so forth and so on. So at the time, well, getting back how I got into this, so I was going to be, I said, well, I didn't know what else. I'd be a teacher. That was it. So Mama said I had to go to college. So I put the 2 together. I said, well, let's go up to Natchitoches.
Did you teach at Westwego High?
Oh, right. Westwego. I taught there, yes, when it was the high school. And it was no longer a high school, and I think it was 1955 when they built the West Jefferson and all this other good stuff, and they took everything there, you see. But I had been teaching there for a number of years, and at the time of my retirement, I was a counselor at the Worley School. It was then the middle school at the time, you see.
And they've built a beautiful new building right off the expressway.
But it'll never mean the same to the people of Westwego as the Worley School.
Well,
the
Westwego High School was where Miss Worley was principal.
Right.
And so then when it became a middle school, they named it for her. So that one building right there, which I think now is Joshua Butler Elementary,
That's right.
has a lot of history and tradition, inside.
That's right. Well, I can show you all of that in picture. And so with that school, there's ever so much history, and I got pictures to show that. What went on at the school, how we had a big educators day. Oh, I had the mayor and everybody else wrapped up in this stuff. I'll show you. I got books and stuff and pictures. This.
To go
from
the sacred to the profane kind of.
Oh, you went to
when I was
you went to Giants.
When I was growing up, like I said, I had relatives in here. And the people from New Orleans, I know for a fact, like to come over to Gretna and Westwego because you could have a good time here. What was the nightlife like?
Well, I'll tell you, I was never much on the nightlife side.
No, I wasn't accusing you of anything.
No, I had a very strict German mother, and when it got dark, you better be in. And so anyhow, what it was like. Now, coming from the river, there was a place there, and you see all the sailors and what have you and stuff landed along they came up there, and he went to the Wego Inn on the hill, and he went to Klaus's on the hill and so forth, and he went to there was even a great big 2-story black entertainment place that was up there, you see. Then as you came along, there's that one that used to be where the post office was. There's one there now, I think. But the best one in the town, if you've heard of Canal Bank Inn, that's the one, but that one's back here on Laracini Street. But Norris Commodale had that one. but he has sold out to someone else that has it now. But that one had a reputation, above all reputation. And oh, there's still another one I forgot. It's on this street, going back just before you get to Robinson's factory. There's one there, you see. Those were the outstanding ones. But the big one was the Canal Bank Inn. And the CBI, it was referred to, you see. And if you couldn't fight, you helped drag out the dead. And there was a gentleman, he was great. He was in his 90s. And to get there, he used to walk from here, and then he could cross over after they closed the canal, you know. And he walked with a cane. He'd take that cane, and you know, to accommodate him what they did. Now, this is what they tell me. I know what's in the joint. They had a nail at the back of the door, a big one, and he would hook his walking cane back of that door on the nail. And when I spoke with him, he used to speak with me all the time. When he'd pass, I was in the yard. And I said, how do you manage? I said, you're out there dancing? And he says, well, I tell you, I hook my cane up back of the door. He says, I get a couple of drinks. He said, you know, and the girls pay for my drinks. I don't buy those anymore. He says, they pay for mine. He says, and after so many drinks, he says, boy, do I feel good. I dance all night. He says, and I don't feel a pain. I said, well, great. Cheaper than going to a doctor and medicine. But it's mostly family affair. Now, let me tell you, this community I wouldn't want any other community if I had choice to do again. You're either in or you're out. They're predominantly French, or they were at the time, predominantly French. And 90% of the people are related to each other. And you'd better be careful what you say and how you say it, because you could be speaking about someone's relatives, you see. And I was always an odd person because my family was German, as I tell you. And they used to say, oh, those are mean people, they're Germans. And during the war and all this other good stuff, you see, I was always, and I had a time, you talk about the blacks having trouble coming through school. Now, I had to fight my way through school, really, because I had that reference. I was German, and we were mean, and we were not to be bothered with. You see, we weren't taken in at all. They just had to get to know you and to see what the story. As a matter of fact, my maiden name was Person, P-E-R-S-O-H-N, you see. So they never could say that. So they said Plaisance or any of these other good French names, that's how I went. And the blacks, they used to refer to me as Little Parasol. They all loved my father dearly because he always had plenty of everything, milk, eggs, whatever. They could come back here and get it. Mr. George, how about this? Mr. George, do this, and so forth. Mr. George would let them all have it, see? And we never had any trouble with the blacks. The blacks were all up there at the track. They were the leftovers from the plantation days, you see. And we had anything. They'd come and see if we had anything left over for supper because we didn't have refrigeration, you see. And they'd come and pick up what was left over after supper. And we had leftover clothes and stuff of that sort. That's how we all did, but they'd look after you. And to show you how they would look out for you, I had to cross that railroad track, and I was coming from Presbyterian Church one night. It was very late. And there was a depot at the Texas and Pacific place. I'm going to show you where that was, on Sala Avenue. There's a depot there. And they had what they call, in those times, they had what they call, these people who ride the boxcars, what did they call them? Hobos. So there was a cattle rack for the train track, and there were a couple of fellas that was on the rack. And coming across this black fella, Preacher Ned, he was the preacher up there, we called him Ned. He said to me, he said, Little Parasol, can I walk for about a block with you till you get home? Well, this thing is a half a mile. So I said, yeah, Ned. He says, because there's some hobos on that track, and he says, I want to see that you get safely on your way. Now, that was way back there. That's how we all grew up together. We didn't have any trouble. If there wasn't anything, we gave it to them. And we talked and visited. But you see, we didn't have air conditioning, we didn't have TV, we didn't have all that stuff. You walked wherever you went. And people were sitting on the front porch fanning and rocking like they had good sense, you know. And they talked to everybody passing on the sidewalk. And we knew everybody just who was what, who was sick, who wasn't. So
Westwego was one big neighborhood.
One big neighborhood. And I'm going to tell you this. It's practically that now as far as getting something accomplished. Because I was the chairperson for our bicentennial celebration and what have you. And I had cooperation. I couldn't do half the things I do in this city if I didn't have the cooperation of every organization. There are one solid group. Well, half of the aldermen I taught and all this good stuff, you know. But every place they go as a body. The mayor, the aldermen, and their wives, they have special tables. When the parish has a birthday celebration or something of that sort, they're always there. They're always going. I told them, I said, look, you may not know these people just on election time. I'm going to tell you what, you know. So, lo and behold, that's how we operate. But everybody puts in. Everybody comes. When I show you what we did with our bicentennial, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Everybody, and I have yet to ask for anything, and I'm here 70 years, I have yet to ask for anything in this town, any project, anything I was working on where I didn't get cooperation and have it done. I couldn't get it done otherwise. They will cooperate. And the best example I can tell you of that is our senior citizen group. We have we got the state recognition that we have a plaque in City Hall to prove it. Outstanding in the state for what we do for our senior citizens. Every organization that has a permit in this town to have a bingo gives $400, and then we have a matching fund, you see, to do that. We put on parties for our senior citizens, 4 and 5 a year, and they go Christmas about $4,000. And the hall is given, the band's given, and all this other good stuff. Everybody, we have 500-600 people we take care of and all this stuff. Oh, we have a wonderful setup. Every organization is represented, every organization's in there helping, and we have a wonderful time. Oh yes, this community is cooperative. Otherwise, I'd never venture to do anything, believe me. You'll get them and that's it. And when I show you, when we had our 50th anniversary of our 1930 class from the high school, when I show you what we received from the governor on down, you can understand what I'm trying to tell you. This picture shows the graduates from the Westwego High School of 1930. There were 9 in the class, 7 girls and 2 boys. And all of them were present, but one who was up north at the time and wasn't able to come back. Now, among them we had some teachers who had taught us. In the back we have Miss Vegas, we have Miss Carrier, and we had Miss Nebishnag. She was a Miss Quinnett at the time, and then we had Mattie Towns. Those were the teachers who were on the faculty all those years. And we had quite a celebration. We had presentations made to us all the way from the governor, State Department of Education. We had the parish and local city governments give us presentations, and we had all sorts of awards that were presented to us that particular night for the function.
Leaving Mrs. BREHM's home, we toured the city she loved so well and encountered along the way some of her and our favorite people.
This award, this Vision Award, was presented to the city in conjunction with the National Month of May recognition on a national level for the elderly citizens. This is an annual award, and the City of Westwego received the first one, and we're very proud of it. And this will be given out each year by the Governor's Office for Elderly Affairs. We have excellent cooperation.
For the whole city, for everything.
Right, we have the various organizations in the city, the business people, the Committee on Aging itself, and the people, the city officials. It's just a united effort to provide this service and entertainment and protection for them. We give them 24 hours a day, ambulance service, 7 days a week. We run errands for them, provide socials. We provided a home for them for the Committee on Aging where they have in-house meals. We also deliver meals to their homes for those that are unable to come out.
Oh, the Westwego Arts and Crafts Festival. And what it is just to show all of the local talent that we have in our city. And when this came out, everybody was surprised that so much talent in our little community. To try and explain it would be impossible. Like they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. You have to see it to believe it. We have a gentleman in the city that carved out of a piece of wood a duck and a crab. And to see this, you think that this crab was getting ready to take off, or you're ready to throw it in a pot and boil it. But just gorgeous work. And we're going to have it again this year on October the 3rd in the Westwego Park.
I understand that this store was originally purchased by BOUDREAUX Terrebonne.
That's correct.
And he had Mr. Bernard, who was Mr. Lynn's father, to come and work at a time when he needed him. I think there was an epidemic or something that started in the town, and he needed help, so he came. But there was some kind of relationship there, weren't there? Some kind of cousins. And he came in and he got interested and the like, and as the years went on, why, he had two sons, LJ and Lynn Bernard, and they came into the store and they took over. Now, this store and the grounds had the first American flag flown in the city of Westwego in the backyard. Bertha told me that. And it had the first bathtub that was in the city of Westwego, per se. Upstairs was the living quarters, you see. And as the years went on, and Mr. L.J. Bernard was deceased, well, the two sons took over. One of the sons is now deceased, so we have Lynn, the other son, and then of course this is one of his sons, Lenny Boy, over here at the store too. Now they maintain the place, and they've had for years. They used to live upstairs, but they live elsewhere now, and they have someone upstairs that's living there now. So you want to pick it up from there, Lynn? They had something out in there?
We've been here as a family for about 75 years, and we hope to be here longer, if possible.
The original Catholic Church was facing the canal bank on what is now Laracini Street. That church was dismantled from St. Charles Avenue at the Jesuits Church, put on a barge, taken across the river, through the locks, and brought through the canal and unloaded on the canal, and it was constructed there. Then the church was moved at the corner here on 4th Street, where it was used for some time. Then this church was built in the meantime, but this was built from scratch. Oh, the other church was a beautiful church. It was all stained glass, gorgeous stained glass. This has just gotten some stained glass put in some of the windows. It's just something new that's been added. Each family puts up, I think, something like $5,000 to have a window named for them or something. But the other was this old-fashioned, heavy-leaded stained glass. It was beautiful. Now, this building over here was the nuns' home. The nuns all lived there, and this Catholic school was run strictly by nuns for a number of years. This is the first and original office building that was here. All the contents on the inside are the original. The flooring, nothing has ever been done or repaired or replaced or anything else. And they used to pay the work people through these little windows you see here on the side. That's how they got paid. And one of the ladies inside has been there in this one spot since 1930.
Thank you for being with us. Join us again for Jefferson Genesis. Next time, we may be telling the story of your little bit of home here in Jefferson Parish.